I walked in on my husband and his best friend. What happened next made me question our friendship. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The sound of their voices stopped the moment my key turned in the lock. I noticed it immediately, that sudden silence that falls when people are caught doing something they shouldn't. But I didn't think much of it at first. I was tired, my meeting had ended early, and all I wanted was to change out of my work clothes and relax before starting dinner. I pushed open the door to our living room and froze. My husband David and his best friend Marcus were sitting on the couch, closer together than seemed necessary, their heads bent toward each other like conspirators. They jerked apart when they saw me, and something passed between them, some look I couldn't quite decipher. Guilt? Fear? Something else entirely? "Jen," David said, his voice too bright, too cheerful. "You're home early." "Meeting finished ahead of schedule," I replied, searching their faces. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. "What's going on?" "Nothing," David said quickly. "Just talking." Marcus stopped by to drop off those tools I borrowed. I glanced around the room. There were no tools visible anywhere. Marcus stood abruptly, smoothing down his shirt. "I should go. I've got that thing I need to get to." "What thing?" I asked, but he was already moving toward the door. "Just a thing. See you guys later." He brushed past me without his usual friendly hug, without making eye contact, and then he was gone, leaving behind only the faint smell of his cologne and a room thick with unspoken tension. I turned to David. "What was that about?" "What do you mean?" "You two looked like I'd caught you planning a bank robbery." David laughed, but it sounded forced. "Don't be dramatic. We were just talking about guy stuff, nothing you'd be interested in." That phrase, guy stuff. He'd been using it a lot lately, dismissing my questions, shutting me out of parts of his life that had apparently become classified information. I wanted to push, to demand answers, but something in David's expression stopped me. There was a hardness there I hadn't seen before, a warning not to dig deeper. So I didn't. Not then. But that was the moment everything changed, even though I didn't know it yet. That was the moment I started noticing things I'd been too trusting, too comfortable, too blind to see before. Let me tell you about David and me, about the life we'd built together over 7 years of marriage. We met in college, fell in love over shared coffee breaks and late-night study sessions, got married 2 years after graduation in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and family. David worked in financial consulting, a job that paid well but demanded long hours. I was a graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing agency, creative work I loved even if it didn't match David's salary. We'd bought a house in the suburbs 3 years ago, a modest 3-bedroom with a yard and a mortgage that stretched our budget, but felt like an investment in our future. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. Marcus had been David's best friend since high school, one of those bonds that seemed unbreakable. He was at our wedding, standing next to David as his best man. He helped us move into our house, spending an entire weekend carrying boxes and assembling furniture. He came over for dinner at least twice a week, sometimes more. He was part of our lives in a way that felt natural and comfortable. I liked Marcus. He was funny, charming in an easygoing way, always ready with a joke or a story. He worked in real estate, flipping houses and managing rental properties, work that gave him flexible hours and apparently a good income, judging by the expensive watch he wore and the new car he drove every few years. He'd dated on and off over the years, but nothing serious. David used to joke that Marcus was married to his work, too focused on building his empire to settle down. Marcus would laugh and say he was waiting for someone special, someone worth changing his lifestyle for. The three of us fell into easy patterns: Friday night dinners, weekend barbecues, holiday celebrations where Marcus was always invited, always welcome. He bought thoughtful gifts for birthdays and anniversaries. He listened when I talked about my work, offered advice on design problems, complimented my cooking. He was family in every way that mattered, or so I believed. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way David and Marcus would exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. The conversations that would shift topics abruptly when I entered a room. The inside jokes I was never quite part of. The times David would say he was meeting Marcus when his phone would ping with messages from other numbers. But at the time, I attributed it all to their long friendship, to having a history that predated me. I wasn't jealous of their bond. I was glad David had someone he could rely on, someone who'd been there through everything. I was a fool. After that strange afternoon when I'd walked in on them, things started to feel different. Not in any obvious way, but in dozens of small ways that accumulated like drops of water wearing away stone. David became more secretive with his phone. He'd always been casual about it before, leaving it on the counter while he showered, letting me use it if mine was charging and I needed to check something. Now he carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. He'd started using a passcode I didn't know. When I asked about it, he said there'd been a security breach at work, and they'd all been required to enhance their device security. Plausible? Reasonable. But my instincts whispered otherwise. Marcus's visits became more frequent, but shorter. He'd stop by at odd times, staying just long enough to have a brief, intense conversation with David before leaving again. Often these visits happened when I was out, and I'd only know about them because I'd see his car pulling away as I came home, or I'd smell his cologne lingering in the house. Money started disappearing from our joint account. Not huge amounts, just a few $100s here and there, withdrawn as cash. When I questioned David about it, he said it was for client lunches, for networking expenses that he'd get reimbursed for eventually. But the reimbursements never seemed to materialize. I found a second phone in David's gym bag one day while I was looking for his dirty workout clothes to wash. It was a cheap prepaid phone, the kind you'd buy at a convenience store. When I turned it on, it had no contacts saved, no call history, no messages. It had been wiped clean. David came home while I was still holding it, staring at the blank screen. "What's this?" I asked. For just a moment, real fear flashed across his face. Then he schooled his expression into something calmer. "Oh, that. It's for work. Backup phone in case my primary goes down during an important deal." "Your firm provides backup phones." "This is a personal backup. Look, can we not make a big deal out of this? I'm exhausted." He took the phone from my hands, slipped it into his pocket, and walked away, ending the conversation before it could really begin. I started paying more attention after that. I started documenting things, not because I was planning anything, but because I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy, that these strange occurrences were real and not just paranoid imaginings. I noticed that David and Marcus seemed to be on some kind of schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, like clockwork, Marcus would call David around 9 p.m. The conversations were always brief, and David always took them in his office with the door closed. I noticed charges on our credit card for gas stations in parts of the city we never went to, restaurants we'd never eaten at, hotels we'd never stayed in. When I asked David about them, he had explanations for everything: client meetings in different neighborhoods, business dinners, a colleague who'd had too much to drink and needed a room to sleep it off. David had been kind enough to book it for him. All reasonable, all plausible, all lies. I knew they were lies because I started checking. I called the restaurants, asking if they kept reservation records. The names David gave me didn't appear in their systems. I drove to the gas stations, looking at the surrounding areas, trying to understand what business David could possibly have there. And slowly, terrifyingly, I began to realize that my husband was living a double life, and Marcus was helping him do it. I want to say I went to David immediately, that I confronted him with my suspicions and demanded the truth. But I didn't. Something stopped me, some instinct that told me I needed to know more before I showed my hand. So I became a detective in my own marriage. I started leaving work early sometimes, parking down the street from our house, watching. I saw Marcus come and go at strange hours. I saw them loading boxes into Marcus's car in the middle of the afternoon on a Wednesday when David should have been at work. I checked our bank statements more carefully and discovered that David had opened a separate account I didn't know about. I only found out because a piece of mail came to the house by mistake, a statement that should have gone to paperless billing. The account had thousands of dollars in it, money I couldn't account for from David's salary. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Rachel Kim, and she came highly recommended from a colleague who'd used her services during her own divorce. I felt sick doing it, felt like I was betraying my marriage, but I needed to know. Rachel was thorough. Within 2 weeks, she had information that made my blood run cold. David wasn't having an affair in the traditional sense. There was no other woman, no secret girlfriend or mistress. But what he was doing was arguably worse. David and Marcus were running an investment scam. They'd created a fake investment company targeting wealthy retirees with promises of high returns from a revolutionary trading algorithm. The algorithm didn't exist. The returns were fake, paid out to early investors using money from new investors. A classic Ponzi scheme, dressed up with professional-looking websites and forged documents. Marcus handled the client-facing work, using his real estate connections to find marks. David managed the money, moving it through various accounts, making it look legitimate. They'd been doing it for at least 2 years, maybe longer. The scope of it was staggering. According to Rachel's research, they'd taken in over $2 million from victims. Some of that money had been paid out in fake returns to keep the scheme going, but a substantial amount had been siphoned off into private accounts, including the one David had hidden from me. Our house, our cars, our comfortable lifestyle, all of it was built on fraud and stolen money. I sat in Rachel's office, reading through her report, and felt my entire world collapse. The man I'd married, the man I'd trusted with my life, my future, my heart, was a criminal. And his best friend, the man I'd welcomed into our home like family, was his partner in crime. "What happens now?" I asked Rachel, my voice barely above a whisper. "That depends on what you want to happen," she said carefully. "You could go to the police. This is serious fraud, maybe even racketeering. They'd likely both go to prison, but there are complications." "What complications?" "You're married to one of them. Any assets in your joint names could be seized as proceeds of crime. Your house, your bank accounts, your retirement savings, everything. You could end up with nothing. And if prosecutors think you knew about the scheme, you could face charges too." "I didn't know," I said sharply. "I believe you, but proving that in court could be difficult. You live in the house bought with stolen money. You benefited from his income. An aggressive prosecutor might argue you should have known, that you turned a blind eye because it was convenient." I felt sick. So my choices are to keep quiet and be complicit, or report them and lose everything? "Those aren't your only choices," Rachel said, "but they're probably the simplest ones. There are other options, more complicated ones, but they'd require careful planning and some calculated risks." "Like what?" She leaned forward. "Like making sure you're protected before this all comes crashing down. Because it will come down, Jennifer. Schemes like this always do. Either they run out of new investors and can't pay the returns, or someone gets suspicious and reports them, or they make a mistake and get caught. The question isn't if, it's when. And you need to decide what side you want to be on when that happens." I didn't go home after my meeting with Rachel. I couldn't face David yet, couldn't pretend everything was normal when I now knew the truth about what he'd been doing. Instead, I drove aimlessly, trying to process everything, trying to figure out what to do. My phone rang. David. I considered not answering, but that would be suspicious. I pulled into a parking lot and took the call. "Hey, where are you?" he asked. I'm home and dinner's not started. The audacity of it, the casual entitlement, made anger flare hot in my chest. I'd been supporting his lie for years, keeping house while he committed fraud, and he was calling to complain that dinner wasn't ready. I had to work late, I lied. I'll be home in an hour. Okay, I'll order something. Marcus is coming over. We've got some stuff to go over. Of course Marcus was coming over. They probably needed to coordinate their criminal activities. Fine, I said, and hung up before he could hear the fury in my voice. I sat in my car for a long time, thinking. Rachel was right. I needed to protect myself. But more than that, I needed to decide what kind of person I was going to be. Was I going to report them, potentially destroying my own life in the process? Was I going to leave quietly, try to start over with nothing? Or was I going to find another way? An idea started forming, dangerous and risky, but possibly brilliant. I drove home. David and Marcus were in the living room when I walked in, papers spread across the coffee table, laptops open, deep in conversation. They looked up when I entered, and I saw it clearly now, that flash of guilt, that scramble to hide what they were doing. Hey, babe, David said. We ordered Thai food. Yours is in the kitchen. Thanks. I stood there, looking at them both. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. David's smile was too wide, too forced. I made a decision. I need to talk to you both, I said. David's expression shifted to concern. Everything okay? No. Everything is very much not okay, and I think it's time we stopped pretending. Marcus started to stand. I should probably go. Sit down, Marcus. My voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. He sat. David's face had gone pale. Jen, what's this about? I know about the investment company. I know about the Ponzi scheme. I know everything. The silence that followed was deafening. David and Marcus looked at each other, some wordless communication passing between them. I saw Marcus shake his head slightly, saw David's jaw clench. I don't know what you think you know, David started, but I cut him off. Don't insult my intelligence by lying to me anymore. I hired a private investigator. I have documentation, bank records, testimony from some of your victims, everything. So please, let's skip the part where you deny it and move straight to the part where we figure out what happens next. Marcus found his voice. Jen, listen, it's not what it looks like. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Really? Because it looks like you and my husband have been defrauding people out of their life savings for years. It looks like you've built your entire lives on stolen money and lies. Please, Marcus, tell me what part of that I'm misunderstanding. He had no answer. David stood up, and I saw real fear in his eyes now. Are you going to the police? I haven't decided yet. Jen, please. If you report us, we'll go to prison. Everything we have will be seized. You'll lose everything, too. I know. I've thought about that quite a bit, actually. It's amazing what you think about when you discover your entire life is built on fraud. So what do you want? Marcus asked. His voice was cold now, calculating. This was the real Marcus, I realized. The one I'd never seen before. Not the friendly, charming man who came over for dinner, but the con artist who could look people in the eye while stealing their money. I want the truth, I said. All of it. And then I want to discuss my options. We talked for hours that night, or rather, they talked, and I listened, piecing together a story that was somehow worse than I'd imagined. It had started small, 5 years ago. Marcus had been struggling financially, his real estate investments going south during a market downturn. He'd borrowed money from some dangerous people, the kind who don't accept bankruptcy as an excuse for non-payment. David had loaned him money to help, but it wasn't enough. They'd been drinking one night, brainstorming ways to make money fast, and the idea had emerged. They'd start an investment fund, bring in some money, use it to pay off Marcus's debts, and then shut it down before anyone got hurt. But it had worked too well. The money came in easily, their victims eager to believe in the promised returns. And once they'd paid off the debts, they couldn't stop. They'd spent the money, built lifestyle around it. They needed the scam to continue just to maintain the illusion. They'd meant to stop, David insisted. They'd talked about it many times. But there was always a reason to do just one more investment round, to bring in just a little more money. And now they were in too deep to get out without consequences. "How much have you stolen?" I asked. David and Marcus exchanged looks. "About 2.3 million, Marcus finally said. "How much of that do you still have?" "Maybe 800,000, spread across various accounts. The rest we've spent or paid out as fake returns." "And the people you've stolen from? Do you ever think about them?" David had the grace to look ashamed. "Every day. But we couldn't figure out how to make it right without destroying ourselves." "So you just kept going, kept stealing, kept lying." "What else could we do?" I stood up, pacing the room. My mind was racing, calculating possibilities, weighing risks. "Here's what's going to happen," I finally said. "You're going to give me access to everything, every account, every password, every piece of documentation. You're going to tell me exactly how this scheme works and who all the victims are." "Why?" Marcus asked suspiciously. "Because I'm going to help you fix this, but we're doing it my way, on my terms. And if either of you lies to me, if you hold anything back, I'll go straight to the FBI. Do you understand?" They understood. Over the next week, they walked me through everything: the fake company, the forged documents, the list of victims, the money trail. I studied it all, looking for angles, for leverage, for a way to turn this disaster into something I could control. I also started making my own moves, carefully, quietly. I opened accounts in my own name, started transferring money in ways that wouldn't be immediately obvious. I consulted with lawyers, not telling them the full truth, just asking hypothetical questions about asset protection and legal liability. And I started reaching out to some of David and Marcus's victims, not as the wife of one of the fraudsters, but as an investigator looking into the company. What I discovered surprised me. Several of the victims had been getting suspicious. Some had started asking questions, demanding documentation, threatening to report the company if they didn't see better proof of how their money was being invested. David and Marcus were living on borrowed time. The scheme was going to collapse soon, with or without my intervention. The only question was whether I could control how it collapsed. I want to tell you I was motivated by justice, by a desire to make things right for the victims. And that was part of it, truly. But I'd be lying if I said that was all of it. I was also angry, furious at being lied to, at being used, at having my entire life revealed as a fraud. I wanted David and Marcus to pay for what they'd done, not just to their victims, but to me. But more than that, I wanted to survive this. I wanted to come out the other side with something, with my freedom and my future intact. And that required being strategic, not just emotional. The plan I developed was complex, risky, and probably illegal in at least a dozen different ways. But it was also, I believed, the best chance I had. Step 1. I became the anonymous whistleblower. I contacted the FBI's fraud division, using a burner phone and a fake email account, providing just enough information to make them start investigating. But I controlled the flow of information, made sure they'd start with David and Marcus's activities before they could start connecting dots back to me. Step 2. I secured my own immunity. Through a lawyer I hired using cash, paying him to represent an anonymous client, I negotiated a proffer agreement with prosecutors. In exchange for full cooperation and testimony, I'd face no charges. The key was positioning myself as another victim, someone who'd been deceived by her husband, not a knowing participant in his crimes. Step 3. I extracted my cut. Before the FBI could freeze all the accounts, I moved money. Not all of it, that would be too obvious. But enough. Enough to start over, to rebuild, to survive. I disguised the transfers as legitimate expenses, moved money through enough layers that it would be nearly impossible to trace. The $800,000 that David and Marcus still had access to? By the time I was done, that was down to $200,000, and I'd made it look like they'd spent the rest on personal expenses and bad investments. The missing $600,000 was secured in accounts they didn't know about, accounts I could access, but that weren't in my name. Step 4. I documented everything. Every conversation, every transaction, every piece of evidence that showed David and Marcus as the architects of the fraud, and me as an unwitting spouse. I built a narrative that would protect me when everything came crashing down. It took 3 weeks to set everything in motion. 3 weeks of living with David, pretending everything was normal, sleeping next to a man I now despised, all while systematically dismantling his life. Marcus was more suspicious than David. He kept asking what my plan was, why I was helping them, what I wanted out of this. I fed him partial truths, told him I was trying to protect our assets, trying to make sure David and I didn't lose everything when the scheme collapsed. "You're smarter than he gives you credit for," Marcus said to me one night when David was out of the room. "I know," I replied. He studied me for a long moment. "You're planning something he doesn't know about." "Aren't you?" He smiled at that, a real smile for the first time since my confrontation. "I always liked you, Jen. I told David he was lucky to have someone like you." "Did you? That's sweet. What a shame you've spent years helping him lie to me." The smile faded. "It was never personal." Fraud never is. That's what makes it so easy, right? The victims are just numbers, just opportunities. You never have to think about the real people whose lives you're destroying. Is that what you think of me? I think you're a con artist and a criminal. I think you'd throw anyone under the bus to save yourself, including your best friend. And I think you're underestimating me, just like David did, just like everyone always has. So what are you going to do? Survive, I said. Whatever it takes. The FBI came early on a Tuesday morning. I knew they were coming, had actually helped coordinate the timing through my lawyer, though of course David and Marcus had no idea. I was at work when it happened, carefully establishing an alibi. David called me, panicked, barely coherent. "Jen, the FBI is here. They're searching the house. They're taking everything. They're saying we're under investigation for fraud. What do I do?" I kept my voice calm. "Don't say anything without a lawyer. I'll come home right away." But I didn't rush. I stopped for coffee, made a few phone calls, gave the agents plenty of time to do their work. By the time I got home, they'd already arrested David. Marcus had been picked up at his office simultaneously. An agent was waiting to talk to me. Her name was Linda Chen, and she'd been the one I'd been feeding information to through my lawyer. "Mrs. Morrison, we need to ask you some questions about your husband's business activities." I played my part perfectly. Shocked, confused, hurt. I told them I'd had no idea what David was doing, that he'd always told me his income came from his consulting work. I cried when they told me about the victims, about the money, about the scope of the fraud. "I thought I knew him," I said, tears streaming down my face. Genuine tears, because even though I'd known the truth for weeks, the reality of watching my marriage publicly destroyed still hurt. I can't believe he'd do something like this. Over the following days, I cooperated fully with the investigation. I gave them access to our accounts, our computers, our files. I told them everything I knew, which was a carefully curated version of the truth designed to make David and Marcus look guilty and me look innocent. The story I told was simple. I'd married David believing he was a legitimate financial consultant. I'd noticed some irregularities lately, money disappearing, strange calls, but David had explained them away and I'd trusted him. When I'd finally discovered the truth just before the FBI arrived, I'd been devastated. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, especially supported by the timeline I'd carefully constructed through my digital communications. Marcus tried to implicate me. In his initial statements, he claimed I'd known about the scheme, that I'd been part of it from the beginning. But he couldn't prove it, and his word as an admitted fraudster didn't carry much weight. Especially when my lawyer produced the evidence I'd gathered, showing how David and Marcus had deliberately kept me in the dark. David, to his credit, never tried to blame me. Whether it was because he genuinely wanted to protect me or because he knew it would be futile, I don't know. In his statements, he took full responsibility, said I'd been an innocent victim of his deception. It almost made me feel bad for him. Almost. The trial was a media sensation. Two men, best friends since high school, running an elaborate Ponzi scheme that had defrauded dozens of victims out of millions of dollars. The prosecution painted them as cold, calculating criminals who had preyed on vulnerable retirees and destroyed lives without remorse. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery, playing the role of the betrayed wife. I wore simple clothes, kept my makeup minimal, let the jury see how devastated I was by my husband's crimes. The prosecution called me as a witness. I told my story, described how David had lied to me, how I'd believed we were living on his legitimate income, how shocked I'd been to discover the truth. Under cross-examination, the defense tried to suggest I must have known, must have suspected something. Mrs. Morrison, you're a smart woman, a college graduate, a professional. You expect the jury to believe you had no idea your husband was committing fraud? I trusted him, I said simply. I loved him. I believed what he told me. That's not stupidity, that's marriage. The jury ate it up. Marcus's defense tried to be more aggressive, suggesting I'd actually been the mastermind, that I'd manipulated both men. But they couldn't produce any evidence, and the jury clearly didn't believe a word of it. If anything, the attack on me made them more sympathetic to my position. The victims testified, one after another, describing how they'd been convinced to invest their retirement savings, their children's college funds, their life savings. Some of them had lost everything. Several were now living in poverty, their comfortable retirements destroyed by David and Marcus's greed. I sat through all of it, tears running down my face, the picture of a woman devastated by her husband's betrayal. And I was devastated truly, but not in the way everyone thought. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on all counts. David and Marcus were each sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. I sat in the courtroom as the judge pronounced sentence, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, no sadness. Just a strange emptiness, like I'd finally reached the end of a very long, very exhausting journey. David looked at me as they led him away. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and in that moment, I think he finally understood what I'd done. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but then closed it again. What was there to say? Marcus didn't look at me at all. The government seized most of David and Marcus's assets, the house, the cars, the visible bank accounts, everything. Victims would get some restitution, though nowhere near what they'd lost. Most of them would never fully recover from what David and Marcus had done to them. I played the part of the devastated wife perfectly. I gave interviews about how betrayed I felt, how I'd lost everything, how I was having to start my life over from nothing. I moved into a small apartment, took on extra freelance work, publicly struggled to rebuild. It was all theater, of course. The $600,000 I'd hidden was safely secured in accounts the government hadn't found, couldn't find. I'd been careful, layering the transactions, moving money through enough entities that it would be nearly impossible to trace back to me. It wasn't all the money David and Marcus had stolen, not even close, but it was enough. Enough to start over, enough to build a new life, enough to survive. I filed for divorce while David was in prison. He didn't contest it. What would be the point? Our marriage had been built on lies anyway. Making it official was just a formality. 6 months after the trial, I left the city. Started over somewhere new, somewhere nobody knew my story. I changed my name, dyed my hair, created a new identity for myself. Jennifer Morrison ceased to exist. In her place was someone new, someone harder, someone who would never be fooled again. I used some of the money to start a legitimate business, a design consultancy that actually helped people instead of defrauding them. It was successful, probably because I actually knew what I was doing. Unlike David and his fake investment company, the rest of the money I invested carefully, legitimately this time. I built security for myself, the kind of security David had promised me, but never delivered. I dated occasionally, but I never let anyone get too close. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, is hard to rebuild. Maybe impossible. I was okay with that. I'd learned that I didn't need someone else to complete me, to support me, to give me value. I could do all of that for myself. Sometimes I thought about the victims, about the people whose lives David and Marcus had destroyed. I felt guilty about that, about taking money that should have gone to restitution. But I rationalized it by telling myself that I'd been a victim too, that I deserved compensation for the years of lies, for the life I'd lost. I'm not sure I really believe that, but it helps me sleep at night. 3 years after the trial, I got a letter. Prison mail from David. I almost threw it away without reading it. What could he possibly have to say that I'd want to hear? But curiosity won, and I opened it. The letter was surprisingly short. Jen, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But I need you to know that I understand now what you did. I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I've pieced it together. You were smarter than Marcus, and I gave you credit for. You saw an opportunity to save yourself, and you took it. You controlled the investigation, built your alibi, made sure you came out clean while we went down. That took planning, intelligence, ruthlessness. I'm not angry. How could I be? You learned from the best con artists around. Marcus and I taught you well. I hope you're happy, wherever you are, whatever life you've built. I hope the money was worth it. I hope you sleep well at night. I don't. David, I read the letter 3 times, then burned it in my kitchen sink, watching the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. He was right, of course, about all of it. I had conned the con artists, had played a part so perfectly that everyone believed it, had walked away with money that by all rights should have gone to the victims. I was exactly what he said I was. Smart, calculating, ruthless. A survivor who'd done what was necessary to protect herself, regardless of the cost to others. The question was whether I could live with that. It's been 5 years now since I walked into my living room and found David and Marcus in that moment that changed everything. 5 years since my comfortable life shattered and revealed the rot underneath. I'm doing well by any objective measure. My business is thriving. I live in a beautiful apartment with a view of the ocean. I have money in the bank, security, independence. I've built a life that's entirely my own, not dependent on anyone else, not built on anyone else's promises or lies. But I carry the weight of what I did, every day. I think about the victims sometimes, the people whose money I took, whose suffering I used as cover for my own escape. I tell myself they would have lost that money anyway, that David and Marcus had already spent most of it, that my taking some made no difference to the victim's outcome. But I'm not sure that's true. Maybe with that extra $600,000, the restitution would have been more significant. Maybe some of those people could have recovered more of their losses. I think about David too, rotting in prison for another decade. He deserves to be there, absolutely. What he did was wrong, cruel, criminal. But I helped put him there not out of justice or principle, but out of self-preservation and revenge. I'm not sure that makes me better than him. And I think about Marcus, the man I'd considered family, who'd turned out to be just as much a fraud as my marriage. He tried to blame me at trial, to save himself by destroying me. I don't feel bad about what happened to him. If I'm honest, I feel nothing about Marcus at all. He was always just a ghost, a performance, a character in a play I didn't know I was watching. The hardest part isn't the guilt, though. It's the knowledge of what I became. I walked into that living room 5 years ago as one person and walked out as someone else entirely. The woman who trusted too easily, who believed in love and partnership and honesty, she died that day. In her place emerged someone harder, colder, more capable of survival, but less capable of connection. I learned to be a con artist from con artists. I learned to lie, to manipulate, to use people's assumptions and emotions against them. I learned that trust is a weakness, and sentiment is a luxury you can't afford when you're fighting for survival. And I got away with it. That's the thing that keeps me up at night. Not that I did it, but that I succeeded. That I outsmarted everyone, the FBI, the prosecutors, David, Marcus, even the victims who saw me as just another person their fraud had destroyed. I'm not sure what that makes me. A villain who won? A victim who fought back? Something in between? Last month, something happened that brought it all back in sharp focus. I was at a coffee shop working on a design project for a client when a woman approached my table. She was in her 60s, well-dressed, with kind eyes that looked tired around the edges. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Jennifer Morrison?" My blood went cold. I'd changed my name, changed my appearance, moved across the country. How had someone found me? "I think you have me confused with someone else," I said carefully. "No, I don't think so. You look different, but I remember your face from the trial. I attended every day. You probably don't remember me. I was just one of many victims who testified." I did remember her, actually. Margaret Hendricks. She'd lost $300,000, her entire retirement savings. She'd testified about how she'd trusted David because he seemed so professional, so legitimate. She'd cried on the stand. "I'm sorry," I said, still maintaining the fiction. "I really think you're mistaken." She sat down across from me, uninvited. "It's okay. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to talk to you. I've been looking for you for over a year." "Why?" She smiled sadly. "Because I wanted to thank you." That was so unexpected, I forgot to keep pretending. "Thank me." "You testified against them. You helped put them in prison. Because of you, we got at least some justice, even if we never got our money back. I know it must have been hard for you to stand up there and admit that your husband had fooled you, that your whole marriage was a lie. That took courage." Guilt hit me like a physical blow. This woman was thanking me, seeing me as a hero, when in reality I'd stolen money that could have gone to her restitution. "I didn't do anything special," I managed to say. "You did, and I wanted you to know that at least one of the victims doesn't blame you. You were a victim too, in your own way. He lied to you just like he lied to us. You lost your life, your home, everything. I hope you've been able to rebuild." I should have ended the conversation there, should have maintained my denial and sent her away. But something in her kind, tired eyes broke something in me. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. If you could get your money back, all of it. But it meant I lost everything. Would you do it?" She thought about it carefully. "No," she finally said. "I wouldn't. Because money can be earned again, saved again. I'm living more modestly now, but I'm surviving. What happened to you, losing your faith in someone you loved, having your trust betrayed so completely, that's harder to recover from than losing money. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even to get my savings back." Tears started running down my face before I could stop them. She reached across the table and took my hand. "It's okay," she said gently. "You're going to be okay." But that was the thing. I wasn't the victim she thought I was. I was the person who'd taken her money, who'd lied to her just as surely as David and Marcus had, who'd used her suffering as a shield to protect myself. After she left, I sat in that coffee shop for hours, staring at nothing, trying to figure out what to do with the weight of her forgiveness, her kindness, her completely misplaced faith in me. That encounter with Margaret Hendricks changed something in me. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about all the victims, about the money I'd taken that could have gone to them. I started researching, carefully, anonymously, finding out where the victims were now, how they were managing. Many of them were struggling. Some had been forced to move in with family members. Others had taken minimum wage jobs in their 70s just to survive. The restitution they'd received from the seized assets had been a fraction of what they'd lost. And I had $600,000 that rightfully belonged to them. I told myself I'd earned that money, that I'd been a victim too, that I deserved compensation for what David had done to me. But the more I thought about it, the less those justifications held up. Yes, David had lied to me. Yes, I'd lost my marriage and my home and my life as I knew it. But I'd also gotten away with theft. I'd stolen from people who had nothing, who needed that money far more than I did. The business I'd built was successful on its own merits now. I didn't need the stolen money anymore. I could survive, even thrive, without it. The question was whether I had the courage to do what was right, even if it meant risking everything I'd built. I spent weeks wrestling with the decision, weighing my options, calculating risks. If I returned the money, could it be traced back to me? Would it expose me as having been complicit all along? Would I end up in prison alongside David and Marcus? Or could I find a way to return it that protected me while still making things right? In the end, it came down to one simple question. What kind of person did I want to be? I could keep the money, keep my comfortable life, keep the security I'd built on a foundation of theft and lies. I could rationalize it, justify it, tell myself I deserved it. And maybe I could even live with that. Or I could try to be better than what David and Marcus had made me. I could try to reclaim some piece of the person I'd been before all of this, before I'd learned to lie and cheat and steal with the best of them. I worked with a different lawyer this time, one in a different state who didn't know my history. I explained that I'd discovered money hidden by my ex-husband, money that should have gone to restitution for his victims, and I wanted to return it anonymously. It took careful planning. The money had to be moved through enough layers that it couldn't be traced back to me, but in a way that prosecutors would accept it as legitimate restitution funds. We created a complex structure involving offshore accounts, shell companies, and cryptocurrency conversions. 3 months after my encounter with Margaret Hendricks, $600,000 appeared in the restitution fund for David and Marcus's victims. The FBI investigated, of course, trying to trace where it came from, but the trail went cold at a cryptocurrency exchange in the Cayman Islands. Eventually, they decided it must have been hidden assets they'd missed in the original investigation, or perhaps money David had stashed that someone had found and decided to return anonymously. They distributed it to the victims according to the original formula. Margaret Hendricks got $73,000. It wasn't the $300,000 she'd lost, but it was enough to make a real difference in her life. I know because I checked, carefully, anonymously, making sure the money had reached the people who needed it. I also know that returning that money was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Watching $600,000 disappear, money I could have kept, money that represented security and freedom and independence. It felt like tearing off my own skin. But I slept better afterward. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking in a cold sweat, without the weight of what I'd done crushing my chest. I still live in my Ocean View apartment. I still run my business, still make good money, still have security and independence. But now it's all legitimate, all earned through my own work, not stolen from people who needed it more than me. I've started dating again, carefully letting people in, learning to trust in small increments. It's terrifying every time, opening myself up to the possibility of being hurt again, but I'm doing it anyway. Because the alternative is living alone forever, protected but isolated, safe but empty. I'm in therapy now, working through the trauma of what happened, but also working through the guilt of what I did. My therapist asks me sometimes if I regret my choices. It's a complicated question. I don't regret leaving David. I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret surviving. But I do regret the person I became in the process. I regret learning to lie so easily, to manipulate so effectively, to turn off my empathy in service of my own survival. I regret that it took me so long to return money that was never mine to begin with. Most of all, I regret that walking into that living room 5 years ago and seeing David and Marcus together didn't just destroy my marriage, it destroyed my innocence. I can never again believe in someone completely, trust without reservation, love without a small part of me staying detached and watchful, looking for signs of betrayal. But maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Maybe that innocence was actually naivety, and losing it made me stronger, more capable, more complete. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. Here's what I've learned from all of this. People are capable of extraordinary deception, the person sleeping next to you, the friend you've known for years. They can have entire hidden lives you know nothing about. Trust is both precious and dangerous, and the line between healthy faith in others and willful blindness is thinner than we like to believe. When you discover you've been living a lie, you have choices. You can be destroyed by it, consumed by rage and pain and betrayal. You can seek revenge, make the people who hurt you pay, or you can use it as an opportunity to rebuild yourself into something stronger, something that can't be broken so easily. I chose a combination of all three. I let myself feel the pain. I made sure David and Marcus faced consequences, and I rebuilt my life from the ashes of what they'd destroyed. But in the process, I also became someone I'm not entirely proud of, someone capable of coldly calculating how to profit from a criminal enterprise, even while bringing down the criminals who ran it. The question I'm still wrestling with is whether that transformation was necessary, or whether I let myself become corrupted by the same greed and selfishness that motivated David and Marcus. I returned the money in the end, tried to make it right. But does that absolve me of stealing it in the first place? Does good behavior now erase bad behavior then? I don't have answers to these questions. Maybe there aren't any answers, just choices and consequences, and the ongoing work of trying to be a decent person in a world that doesn't always reward decency. What I do know is this: I survived. When everything fell apart, when my entire life revealed itself to be a carefully constructed lie, I found a way to keep going. I was smart enough, strong enough, ruthless enough when I needed to be, and eventually ethical enough to try to correct my mistakes. I walked in on my husband and his best friend 5 years ago and discovered they were con artists. In fighting to survive their betrayal, I became one too. But unlike them, I eventually chose to stop, to return what I'd taken, to try to be better. Whether that makes me a hero or a villain, or just a deeply flawed human being trying her best, I'll leave for others to judge. All I know is I'm still here, still standing, still building a life worth living. And maybe, in the end, that's enough. It's been 8 years now since that afternoon I came home early, and everything changed. David was released from prison 6 months ago after serving his full sentence. I heard about it through the grapevine, old mutual friends who still occasionally reach out, unsure whether I want to hear news about him. I don't feel anything when I think about him anymore. Not love, not hate, not even curiosity about what his life is like now. He's simply someone I used to know, someone who taught me painful lessons I needed to learn. Marcus is still in prison. He violated parole somehow, ended up with additional charges. I don't know the details, and I don't care to learn them. Margaret Hendricks sent me a Christmas card last year, somehow tracking down my new name and address. She didn't say how she found me, just wrote that she hoped I was doing well, that she was thinking of me. The card included a photo of her with her grandchildren, all of them smiling at a family gathering. Inside the card, she'd written, "The extra restitution that mysteriously appeared changed my life. I was able to help my daughter with her mortgage, to buy Christmas presents for my grandkids, to breathe again. I don't know where that money came from, but I'm grateful for it every day. I'm grateful for you too, for your courage during the trial. I hope you've found peace." I keep that card on my refrigerator, a reminder of why some choices matter more than others, even when they're hard, even when they cost us something. My business continues to thrive. Last year, I hired 3 employees and moved into a real office space. I'm building something that matters, something that helps people, something I can be proud of. I'm seeing someone now, a kind man named Andrew, who works as a teacher and has no idea about my past. I've told him I went through a difficult divorce, that my ex-husband did some things that hurt a lot of people, but I haven't told him the full truth. Maybe someday I will. Maybe I'll never need to. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about the woman I was before all this happened. The trusting, naive woman who believed in the fairy tale of happily ever after, who thought love and loyalty were enough to build a life on. I miss her sometimes, that innocent version of myself, but I don't want to be her again. She was too easy to fool, too willing to ignore warning signs, too ready to sacrifice her own judgment for the sake of keeping peace. The woman I am now is harder, more skeptical, more guarded. But she's also more honest, more capable, more true to herself. She knows her own worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation. She knows she can survive anything because she already has. When I walked in on David and Marcus that afternoon 8 years ago, I thought my life was ending. In a way, it was. But it was also beginning, though I couldn't see it then. The life I have now, built on honesty and hard work and genuine connections, is better than the lie I was living before. Was the journey worth the pain? I'm still not sure. Some days I think yes, that I needed to be broken down to be rebuilt stronger. Other days I think about how much simpler my life would have been if David had just been the person he pretended to be, if that afternoon had been innocent, if I'd never had to learn these hard truths. But we don't get to choose what happens to us. We only get to choose what we do with it. I chose to survive. I chose to fight. I chose, eventually, to try to do the right thing even when it cost me. And I choose every day to keep building a life that's real, that's mine, that no one can take away from me because it's not built on lies. That's not a perfect ending. It's not even a happy ending, not really. But it's an honest one. And after everything I've been through, everything I've done, everything I've learned, honesty is the only thing I have left to build on. So I'll take it.